What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Launchpad Podcast. I'm your host, Gabriel Hardy, and in this episode today, I have Dennis Walker with me. Um, According to Dennis's Instagram bio, he is a journalist, satirist, puppeteer, but I came across his content in him when my friend sent me a reel of yours on Instagram, and it was some of the funniest shit I'd ever seen. It was truly unique in this sort of really saturated place right now. Like the content market is so saturated, and especially with the sort of healing industry and the psychedelic industry that has gotten on board with that. And whenever he sent me your reel, truly just like cutting through the smoke and mirrors, poking fun, I was like, this dude has it going on because he's able to communicate a really powerful sort of message, but wrapping it up in humor. And I've always appreciated people who are really intelligent because, yeah, I think that, or I'm sorry, people who are really funny because it's truly, I think, a sign of intelligence. But yeah, could you just kind of introduce yourself, man, and tell everybody like who it is, who you are, and what it is that you do?
Absolutely. First off, thank you for such a wonderful, concise, and moving introduction, Gabriel. Hello, everybody. My name's Dennis Walker. I am the founder of a platform called Mycoprenuer, which is a portmanteau, meaning two words shoveled together that have different meanings but create a new meaning. And that is myco for the root word mushroom and preneur for entrepreneurs. So I started this platform 4 years ago. It was very much a pandemic project with the guiding ethos being that if more people could learn how to build sustainable livelihoods around working with mushrooms in any capacity, then we could have more mushrooms for all of us. And I think there's so many untapped wonders of mushrooms, which we're really just scratching the surface of, right? And I think the cultural fascination with psilocybin mushrooms and amanita mushrooms, et cetera, has driven this broader interest and discovery process of all these other things mushrooms can do for our health, of course, for materials, like really love following reishi and myco materials. Look, I got a mushroom paintbrush someone just gave me. This is this beautiful reishi paintbrush. If people aren't able to see it, it's a beautiful reishi spire, like a limb. It's not a conch. It's just a long, elongated reishi limb, you could say. And it's been made into a paintbrush. And I just started meeting all these cool people once I started posting stories and writing stories and hosting a podcast called Mycoprenuer. All these creative, intelligent people came out of the woodwork to say, I'm working on a mushroom project. And then about a year into that, I started doing mushroom satire, which is admittedly a very niche subject area. But I realized, as Gabriel described, there's this bizarre, frenetic collision course right now between healing and capitalism, between psychedelics and mushrooms and ayahuasca, et cetera, and capitalism. And when you throw that on social media and you get all these people trying to sell courses and sell retreats and be the main character in their healing journey, but invite you into that, and you can sign up for it. Like, it just naturally extended itself to satire. And it doesn't mean that I don't think there's value in those types of people and in alternative wellness and rejecting the status quo in favor of maybe more radical and interesting paths. But again, I think we're in short supply right now with humor and satire. And it turned out this is a really good model for offering critique in a fun way, not being so sharp and pointed, but really making yourself part of the process and trying to build around laughter and examine our biases and this great experiment we're all undergoing right now, which is the mainstreaming of all these ancient wellness modalities and visionary plants into mainstream society, amplified by social media. Perfect for satire.
Yeah, it does feel like, okay, yeah. There's a lot you said there. It does sort of feel like we're at this like point, right? Like I think it was Terrence McKenna. I think he used to call it like the Great Awakening. In some indigenous cultures, it's referred to as the eagle and the condor prophecy. But there is simultaneously sort of like this mixture of a lot of ancient sort of wisdom and things coming through, and then merging with like this really, really crazy time that we're living in, right? In the modern technology and advancements. And I feel like what you're describing, this sort of like social media presence, the market around it and everything, is very reflective of that. Like it's just, it's reflecting this kind of thing that we're all just like kind of figuring out together in a way, right? And I intuitively felt into so many of the things that you like, the jokes that you make and stuff, because like, if you're interested in these things and your algorithm follows that and it starts pushing them to you, like I quickly became sort of enamored in like the market. I was like, at first I was like, this is interesting. And then very quickly it became like this thought of like, well, like how many integration coaches can there be? And like, it's also, and I was also like, um, just from a sort of like realistic, from my perspective, I guess from my reality tunnel and from where I live and the place I live in, a lot of people that I know and regularly interact with, I was just thinking to myself, like, all I see is integration coaches, but I can't think of a single one that could actually afford one of these dudes. Like, and not that like that is a bad thing. I'm sure that plenty of these people who are offering these types of services are, they're ninjas and they truly do provide value to people. And there's a fair recidivism of that. But I'm sure there's also a lot of like not too, like a lot of fiduciary involved. So yeah, like I know this is a very, very loaded question. We're just kind of jumping into all of this really quickly, but like with all of this coming together like this, where do you think that this sort of psychedelic renaissance is taking us?
Yeah, such a loaded question, and one which I
Yeah.
spent a fair amount of time pondering. But what I'm increasingly noticing is the propensity for these systems that a lot of us envisioned mushrooms and psychedelics as hopefully being able to overcome and evolve beyond. I'm talking about this industrial mindset, extractive mindset, devoting all of our time to working and punching the clock for a hierarchical corporate structure. And then, you sit in traffic for an hour each way and you go home and you eat your microwaved box dinner and drink your box wine or whatever, and then wake up and do it again. And hopefully, if you do it all right, when you're 65, you retire and your mortgage is paid off, even though it probably won't be. Like, I think a lot of us grew up, myself included, from, grew up in the 90s and kind of saw this, what I call like peak American culture. Like, the United States today, and especially hinging on this election cycle, to me is just totally different than the United States of the 90s I grew up with. And for some people that could be good, for other people that could be challenging, but it's almost unrecognizable. And so growing up, I kind of saw the bubble burst when I started looking for my own answers. And I think in a big way, weed was a gateway drug there, where like I had my first cannabis experience. And immediately I thought, whoa, I've been lied to by all of the social programming and the education and the dare, all of this, weed's going to make you go insane, reefer madness. My first experiences were so grounding, so beautiful, so illuminating. I had a great sense of self and my imagination expanded, and it was funny and it was healing and I slept well. So I think really that was kind of like the first stone that got overturned, and you start looking and scrutinizing other things specifically related to the messaging around drugs and how you're supposed to live your life. And that pretty quickly led me to an interest in plant-based entheogens, right? And mushrooms and ayahuasca, so on and so forth. So like many of us, I started going down Arrowwood rabbit holes and started just reading all these trip reports, started all of a sudden, once you start looking for it, I realized like, whoa, I have friends who do this stuff, right? Like people in my suburban middle class circles are already growing mushrooms and it's kind of whispered about. So in that regard, I think it's funny what we're seeing today because it was such a niche subculture for so long. Like you couldn't give mushrooms away to a lot of people, right? They kind of had this stigma and stereotype as like, those are for the hippies, those are, for the weirdos. And then there were these little subcultures of psychonauts, of people who just wanted to kind of do anything we could get our hands on, like go to the gas station and buy salvia. I'm sure a lot of people have been through that, right? Just like,
Yeah.
wait, we can buy 120x salvia at the gas station and then go smoke it in the parking lot and enter a parallel dimension. How come nobody told me about this? And, I tried a bunch of different things and got really into all of it. And I felt like mushrooms were really the most interesting for me out of all of them because they were very accessible. They still are very accessible. There's a whole lot of other things they can do, as mentioned, which I found out about: mushroom packaging and mycoremediation for cleaning up oil spills. Of course, this is years later, but circling back to how it collides today with this psychedelic renaissance is I realized that like a lot of these visions we had for a lot of people who were into mushrooms and the Terrence McKenna's of the world, so on and so forth, actually it's kind of being stamped out and tied into business as usual, where somehow the conversation is now shifting towards what about psilocybin therapy as an employee benefit? And there's studies being published about how if your employees have psilocybin therapy, it can actually reduce the amount of hours they miss work and it motivates them to be better workers. And then the whole idea of putting mental health in this box, right? And like trying to pathologize people's suffering and say, well, psilocybin, this one component that's manufactured in a lab in a clinically controlled environment and administered under the watch care of this trained professional who, quite frankly, really probably just did a couple of 50-hour program, or even if it's more intense, it's not like it used to be. It's being adapted and tweaked, these models, to fit into this very unsustainable and broken model, which is our current healthcare system. And you get these people saying, oh, it's a mental health revolution, it's a psychedelic renaissance. But like, if you actually look at these claims being made and the people making them, it's really just being tied into this medicalized format that eschews and ignores a lot of the broader potential of these substances and tries to make it fit into their boxes of the way things are done. And we see that happening right now actively. And I think it's a bunch of bullshit, quite frankly. Like, you can put all the marketing and all the spin on it, but if you're trying to take this miraculous, incredible, visionary, ancient substance and tweak it and modify it to fit this medical pharmaceutical paradigm, and you're being driven by market share, like, you missed the whole fucking point. Hopefully I can say that.
Yeah, dude, let it rip, please do. And like, I definitely resonate with everything you're saying. This is something that we've talked a lot about. So there's this little group of us called like the Psych Tubers, like me, Tyler, a few other psychedelic content creators. We've done some like group podcasts, and this very thing right here was a big topic of discussion with one of our podcasts. Was this sort of like, kind of like the question I had asked you that positioned all of this, was like, where do you think that this is going? Where do you think that the model looks like right now, the trajectory, and like, where do we need to go? And we talked about this medicalization model a lot, right? And it's been massively frustrating to me because, and I've said this several times, but I'll say it again, it kind of feels like this carrot on the stick phenomenon, right? Where it's like, oh, we're going to dump tens and tens, if not billions of dollars into potentially this one pathway for maybe not even a full spectrum like product, like a isolated compound, like you said, delivered in this medicalized setting for certain people who can afford it. Maybe in 2028, if it's approved, then like, the fucking medicine is here, it's been here, and it's being held up by a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. And like, anybody with a level head on their shoulders can fucking see that. And there's a lot of people suffering, and it's because it's being held up by bureaucratic nonsense. And one of the things that we said that you fell in love with the mushroom. I resonated with that a lot too, because I too fell first in love with cannabis, and then that led me to the mushroom. And I experimented, and I still experiment. And I love all the compounds. They all are unique and cool in their own way. But I fell in love with the mushroom because it felt very empowering, like, to the individual. And what I mean by that is, like, there was this like direct relationship that I could have with it, and also the access to it. Like, it is very, very cheap, safe, reliable access to this very powerful sort of thing. And it felt like the encapsulation of that whole thing, the mushroom, just felt empowering at the individual level, because I didn't have to have a dealer or know a guy or reagent test this thing or worry about, the intentions that it was made with, or whatever. And I've also noticed this trend about like psilocybin becoming more normalized in our society. I think it's really interesting. It's I'm sure you've heard of the term like Cali sober, and
For sure.
like, seems like the past year or two, any time that I've spent in some of these bigger, more progressive cities, or just generally like on the West Coast, it seems so normalized there. Like, I was just in LA, and it's almost like cannabis, like the accessibility of it, the amount of people who are just selling it to you, telling you about it. But I think that this brings up something important that I kind of want to get like your opinion on. And this is something I saw with the sort of cannabis market, is this repeated pattern of what I would call like the white lab coat syndrome, right? So like, before, I guess I'll just speak generally, but like, A lot of people will trust the white lab coat in terms of, like, say, a doctor giving them prescription medication. Hey, here's the magic bullet. Here's the thing that's going to fix you. Trust me, I'm the expert. And then, when I found cannabis, it was very liberating to me because it, once again, kind of felt like mushrooms, this sort of like self empowerment at the individual level. But I see the same sort of trap and cycle that people fall into with cannabis, with this white lab coat syndrome of, like, it's showing up to the dispensary and, hey man, do I get sativa or indica today? You're my bud tender. You know that you know what's best. What do I do? Um, and yeah, and so I feel like with psilocybin, and this is something that, and I guess mushrooms in general, but this is something that Terrence Smith kind of talked about a bit, was the to harvest your own psilocybin, it sort of necessitates at least a certain degree of, like, intention and forethought and organization and stuff like that, um, that would go into it, that would help set you up for when the trip did come, that it could potentially be a more efficacious sort of experience. But yeah, what do you think about, like, this sort of white lab coat syndrome, and do you fear that we might repeat that with psilocybin and, like, other psychedelics?
Totally. I think there's a lot of white lab coats and the institutions that uphold them and they define that are actively banking on that right now. And it's been kind of interesting being in the public eye as a spokesperson, if you will, or ambassador for my own experiences with mushrooms, because I get approached by the white lab coats. And I got invited recently to be a potential advisor to a psychedelic clinic. They're doing ketamine and they want to roll out psilocybin. It's very much on the cusp of happening. I think because a lot of these white lab coats and the systems they uphold recognize that this is not going away. Like, people know that psilocybin mushrooms have profound potential. So it really becomes almost like a risk management strategy for them about how can we legalize psychedelics in our way, right? Which is, in a funny way, kind of what's happening with cannabis in a sense. Like, you can do it, but you can't actually consume it in public. Like, you got to do it here, you got to do it this way. And I think that's offered a roadmap for consumer packaged goods like CPGs, right? About where psychedelics might head. Because while I fully recognize that people probably should be cultivating themselves if they can, if they're able to, I think that's the way to do it. The reality is we do have a very consumer based culture where people want to go get something. It's just like pop into Trader Joe's and grab some orange chicken for dinner. There could be an analogy there with what I see happening with the productization of psychedelics. And I'm actually headed to Denver to MC the second annual Colorado Psychedelic Cup. And it's my understanding they're doing elevated products at large. So there's actually mescaline containing products, DMT containing products. I'm sure you've seen it or are aware of it. There are tons of DMT vapes on the market, right? There are all kinds. I've seen ayahuasca gummies, right? I wouldn't be surprised if there's iboga gummies. So we've entered this really weird matrix of trying to take all of these different traditions and thousands of years of history and use cases and then fold them into this new hybrid paradigm. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde, right? Like this Frankenstein patchwork of different cultural values and ideas that ultimately gets driven by the bottom line now. And I think that's tying it back to the white lab coat syndrome. That is a very profitable system for a lot of reasons. Like, the pharmaceutical industry is a multiple $1 trillion industry. And someone could probably correct me on that figure, but I've looked into it and researched it. It's an absolutely massive industry. There's a reason that pharmaceuticals are everywhere. And did you know that the United States and New Zealand are the only two places in the world where pharma companies can advertise on television? So if you watch the Super Bowl or the World Series, so on and so forth, just count how many pharmaceutical ads you see. So then think about regulatory capture and about if psychedelics are coming into the mainstream, there's already super PACs and lobbyists. And again, it gets folded into this business as usual. Now, the good news, everybody, is I firmly believe and have experienced that mushrooms themselves have a very keen and rapacious intellect. And hope I used rapacious in the right way there. They have a very sharp intellect, right? So I think they have their own agenda. And a lot of these lab coats I've mentioned, I think that there's value in some of the services they offer, but the gatekeeping to me misses the whole point of being able to cultivate yourself is what it comes down to. Is I see like if you're cultivating mushrooms, you're cultivating that community. That immediately is harm reduction. That immediately is intention. That immediately is getting you out of this mindset of being like a bystander or a submissive recipient in the experience, and puts you into the driver's seat where you're actually helping create this experience, curate it. You're having a sense of agency. And I think that's what it comes down to ultimately, is that why psychedelics, mushrooms, etc., are so threatening to entrenched values in the establishment, is because they potentially give people a lot of agency, right? If I'm sitting around, I'm depressed, I'm mopey, all kinds of things have happened to me. We live in a trauma fetishizing world where we're constantly bombarded with trauma on our timelines, and this tragedy happening in this part of the world and this division between people. Well, like if I don't have agency, it becomes very easy to kind of co-opt, coerce, convince you to do things a certain way. And I think that's the whole point of what a lot of these Leviathan states have become, is they want to control people. So if you have agency, it's much harder to control you. And I could go off on a rabbit hole for a long time about this. Like, just look at all the high density housing that's being built and the normalization of inflation. And hey, like, you need to pay, tons, all your money you earn from working so hard, that's got to go immediately to rent. You'll never own, you're just going to rent. And then, the food systems, you just got to, buy an industrialized food system, essentially. Like, look at red line neighborhoods, and you go to impoverished areas and they're food deserts. You find a Del Taco or a Taco Bell and a McDonald's. You go into the corner store and they've got packaged foods. Like, I don't think that this is tinfoil hat territory to say. It seems to be like some network of very powerful interests have captured our government in the West specifically, and that you eat industrialized food, you have a sedentary lifestyle, you pay attention to your TikTok timeline and have short dopamine bursts. And then you're wondering why you're sick and you're unhappy and all that. So then you look for the white lab coats to help tell you, well, okay, I'm going to prescribe this psilocybin with this regimen. I don't think the goal was ever, as people claim, to heal people. It's to keep people just sick enough, and, so that they're not going to be totally fed up and go throw everything away and revolt, just like normalizing this sense of being incapacitated and helpless. And to me, mushrooms, etc., offer you an alternative pathway to that. And that's very threatening to a lot of powerful interests. Get on my soapbox for a minute there.
Yeah, no, dude, you're touching on some really important things there, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of that point I was making earlier about sometimes the whole psychedelic thing, especially the psychedelic market in the United States, feeling like a carrot on a stick, because it's there's so many deep rooted issues, right? That it's kind of like, is this just another part of the smoke and mirrors, to sort of, like you said, to kind of just kind of heal us and things like that. And I thought your point about the consumer products was kind of interesting too, because you always hear people say that, like, the most important thing to do is cultivate it yourself. So you should do. And once again, I think that is really important. A lot of people feel called to that should, but that is a reality as well too. We live in a consumerized society where a lot of people want these ready to go consumer products. I know people like that, where it's like, hey, I don't do mushrooms very often. When I do, I would like to eat it in a chocolate bar, and because of the intense competition within this market nowadays, and everyone's growing mushrooms, now I can get chocolate bars for $10. You know what I mean? And yeah, and it I guess to circle it back to the white lab coat syndrome, because this is a topic that I've heard you you joke about quite a bit. But man, the microdosing phenomenon. what what do you think about the microdosing phenomenon? And if I can, I'll just give you like my brief sort of like opinion on it, because this is something that there's all sorts of research content, things like that. I say research. There's research content, people telling you should do it, people telling you it changed their lives. And I think there's a lot of truth in this. But I've experimented a lot with it myself, man. And this idea, it's the idea of it being subperceptual that I sit on the fence about a lot, right? because and this is subjective, but this is also from me talking to a lot of other people who have personally experimented on themselves as well too. I don't find microdosing to be super efficacious almost in any sort of sense the times that I've truly done it subperceptually, and that's even sticking like pretty religiously to regiments. The times that I have found it to be efficacious for myself is when I instead it's almost like this art form, this art form of like ever so slightly brushing up against perception, where my perception is changed just a tiny bit, like tiny trip, but like it is not sub-perceptual. And I do have found that those mini doses like that in those days, I call them mini doses, I have found those to be, therapeutic and sweet and really like a unique tool for their own unique cases. But yeah, man, what do you think about the whole microdosing phenomenon?
I have so many thoughts on this issue. I'm going to try to unpack them. And just like you, I'm going top of mind here, speaking from many years of experience that I'm trying to distill into cogent and meaningful analyses right now. So hopefully this works. But first thing I'll start off with saying is just like the whole push to normalize or legalize or pharmaceuticalize psychedelics for mental health pathologies and specific indications for depression, for PTSD, etc. When I first started mushrooms, getting into them and connected to this global community of psychonauts and travelers and explorers, not a single person was microdosing. Not a single person was discussing mushrooms overtly for their quote mental health benefits. It was explicitly out of this interest of exploration and experimentation and artistry, right? I think there's this connection between people who are interested in art, in making music and painting and acting, etc., and altered states as facilitated by mushrooms or other psychedelics. There just seemed to be this incredible connection where a lot of the people I knew for many years who were interested in tripping were also coincidentally or serendipitously artists. And I think that comes down to wanting to view the world in a different way, wanting to step outside yourself and be a little bit more objective, if that's possible for a sense, and less biased. And these things dovetail really well to me into open mindedness. Now we're hearing this argument that mushrooms don't make you open minded. Like you could be on the far right or the far left and they just amplify your views. Well, I think there's a lot of cultural reinforcement and conditioning going on there. Like I always talk about when I first got really interested in mushrooms and started reading Terence McKenna and started going down Arrowhead, started talking to people, not just in my immediate environment, but like I went to Amsterdam and I bought mushrooms. I'm tripping with psychonauts over there. And then I'm in other parts of the world and I'm in Australia and I'm learning about their mushroom culture. I wasn't conditioned or echo chambered by the social media messaging that's going on and by the current insane media landscape that's just like blitz people with fear propaganda, paranoia. There's a crisis every week. You got to worry about this crisis and the planetary crisis and the housing crisis and the banking crisis. None of that was on my mind. So it felt like I had the permission and the ability to just build a relationship with the mushroom directly, and in doing so cultivate my sense, my own sense of self, learn about myself more and more. So getting back to microdosing, this phenomenon that's just emerged, like truthfully, it's my understanding it has been in practice for a long time. I've worked briefly with Jim Fadiman, who was the OG microdosing godfather daddy. And they were using it, as far as I understand, in these little circles, like in Silicon Valley, et cetera, for specific purposes. And okay, so maybe there's some merit to it. And I recognize that. But the whole modernization, what I see mainly is a lot of opportunism. It's a lot of, hey, do this and you can disrupt that pattern of addiction, or you can become a better tech employee or a better boss. And that may be the goal for some people. I'm fundamentally a cognitive libertarian. So if people want to do that, I'm all for it. And I actually just gave a keynote on microdosing. It's kind of a funny story because it wasn't my idea. I was talking at the Oklahoma Mushroom Festival and they said, hey, you want to give a talk? And I said, absolutely. And then when the schedule dropped, it said, what is a microdose? I didn't pitch it. I didn't name it. And I hit up the organizer. I was like, dude, what is this? And he's like, oh yeah, a lot of people ask me about microdosing. It's like the number one thing almost every day. So I thought you'd be a good person for it. And I leaned into it. So I did the research. I looked at it. There's all kinds of different thoughts on, does it work? Is it placebo? the way I see it is if so many people are getting value from it, and let's say it does truthfully help someone disrupt an opiate addiction or an alcohol addiction, like super valuable. If that's a tool, put it in your toolkit and use it. But I always kind of come back to the sense of not a single person I knew who was into mushrooms, and you could even say called to them, because I really feel like mushrooms called to certain types of people. They didn't need all this marketing. Like they did it in spite of their censorship and their prohibition. Like it was word of mouth, and it was people who were interested in, oh, I know this circle. They're different. They're interesting. What's their secret? And so when we learned about those things and we tapped into it, of course people want to do bigger doses. Like I've always had a soft spot for the kind of head in the clouds visionary type, right? Who have these grandiose visionary experiences and they're turned into a psychonaut. And then it becomes a little bit difficult to function in modern society, because modern society is not set up to reinforce a lot of the insights that you have on your trip, right? You have a nice mushroom trip and the mushrooms tell you you're special, you're beautiful, life is good. Here's some insights. Here's how you can heal this. Here's how you can work on that. And then you go back to work or back to school on Monday, and literally not a soul is there to help reinforce these values. It's like, oh, you think you're special? You're 5 minutes late. You're going to have to clean the bathroom after work or whatever. Like that's what I encountered. So I think a lot of people who had those experiences, they sought out trying to find a different path, because a lot of people see these systems that are supposed to be protecting us are arguably broken. And I would love to debate people on that, because I also recognize there's some value in a lot of the modern world. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like I like having access to travel and to goods and so on and so forth. But at the heart of it all, there seems to be this ennui, this general sense of brokenness, unhappiness, and people just trying to get by. And with all the technology, all the genius, all the intelligence we have in our world, all the humor, I feel like something has gone terribly wrong. It's been a sort of like slow build. You could call it the frog boiling. People might be familiar with that analogy of like, if you're trying to boil a frog, if you heat the water up really quickly all at once, the frog will jump out. If you incrementally raise the temperature, the frog will be cooked before they know what's happening. And I think there might be some of that element in play with the design of modern society. And I saw that years ago, and I sought to build something different. And just to round out this thought, like I was doing the normal establishment life. Like I was a church youth group leader for a year. I taught in a high school for 2 years. I rented an expensive apartment. I got married, so on and so forth, as a lot of people do. And then you just get kicked out. It's like, oh, the company doesn't need you anymore. Oh, the landlord can't have you anymore because they just sold the building and they're going to put in new units. So like you realize like you could kind of follow this carrot and stick breadcrumb trail, and there's this veneer of security and stability, and then it can just be taken at any point. And I think people are starting to realize that. So there's two paths people have chosen. One is to like try to find a new way and learn outside of these systems and develop and start your own business, be a mycopreneur, so on and so forth. And the other is to double down on that scarcity fear factor and be like, I just really need a stable job. I really need a 1-bedroom apartment. I really need this, that, and the other. I need my health insurance. I need my, retirement pension. And I think that there's a lot of unscrupulous hucksters. People talk about the underground guides and the unethical operators. Like there's totally unethical operators and hucksters and leeches working at the banking cartels, right? Or working at the energy giants. Like I don't think just because someone is successful in the Western mindset we have of like climb to the top of the food chain and then dominate everyone below you. Like I don't really see that as success. And I could go off on the tangent for a while here, but yeah, microdosing to me feels more inclusive and reflective of this modern marketing around psychedelics where people are looking for someone else to tell them how to be. That being said, I also agree with the term mini dose, and I've mini dosed for years. Like I think the term microdose is kind of put in a box in a way, and like nobody can even agree on what it is. Like what is a microdose? And I should be able to talk about this because I've been a part of some of these like world-class trainings and worked with these major figures. And I've seen Paul Stamets debating the head of the Imperial College London microdosing clinical trials in person from 5 feet away. And he's yelling at him that he got the data wrong and all that. And so mini dosing, like I've loved that for years. I still love it. And I don't necessarily like get out a scale and weigh 0.35 or whatever. It's like I'll eat, one stem or like one cap or like a small dose, and you can function and your perception is definitely altered a little bit. It's contoured. Well, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Like I've leaned into that for social purposes, for creative purposes. And but again, like the whole idea of trying to get a protocol and get a coach and follow this, to me, it kind of fits back into that subservient system of like, I'm going to outsource all of my thinking about this incredible mushroom opportunity that's in my face. I'm going to outsource that to someone else and I'm going to turn it into business as usual. So, but that being said, again, cognitive libertarian, if it works for you, you microdose to your heart's content, BB. All good.
Yeah, yeah. Amen, bro. uh, there was something you said in there. It reminded me, like, I remember many times, especially back in like early college, there'd be like a night where I smoke DMT while I'm on 6 hits of acid or something, right? And I have like this mountain peak moment. And then it's like the next day I gotta like do homework and like go deliver pizzas, and it's this thing you were mentioning about like, there's no societal sort of like reinforcements of these like deep moments and these mystical moments and these values that get imprinted upon you. And, yeah, I see this, I'm going to loop this back into, this market that we've been talking about. And for me personally, I remember like being at Papa John's thinking like, God, like, is this really it? Like I was just on the mountaintop last night and there's this realization that took quite some time for me of repeating this pattern of realizing like I had to change my actual life. You know what I mean? And like, it was like a lot of things that you've illuminated. I knew like, all right, like 9 to 5 working for some corporation thing, like it was going to be very unfulfilling and depressing and dark. And like, and so it was this core thing that I was in definitely different ways like repressing, but I can see in hindsight how at that time the sort of constant reaching for these mountain peaks was part of the repression of that, right? It's that carrot on stick thing. And so when I see it in other people who it's like, oh, you did ayahuasca 3 months ago and now you're an integration life coach. I see it from this place of like I see myself in them, and I see like I don't, people always say, and I think that this is partly true. People in these positions often say like, I do it because I feel called, or I do it because like I want to give back and do something good and use my life force for good. And I think there's so much truth in that. I think most people mostly mean that, but I think a big fucking part of it, dude, is a lot of people, once they have these mystical mountain peak moments, they have the same sort of realization that, oh shit, this system, this thing I'm in sucks and I want to get out of it. And they see the opportunity in this thing, right, that they just experience and they can share with others, and it's a new popping thing, and they can um yeah, yeah, I feel like I see that. And it kind of comes back to this phenomenon that is talked about quite a bit in like the spiritual community, the psychedelic community, but it's this phenomenon of like some dudes will smoke DMT and like swear to God like they're Jesus, right? And like that's more common. That's really common, man. Like and sometimes I wonder like where do you think that comes from? And do you think that is amplified because of the society that we live in?
100% it is. And also just circling back to a lot of these diatribes that I've gone on here is I think that's where the humor element really comes into play. Is a lot of my most profound experiences with psychedelics have really just been, don't take that too seriously. Like just have fun, like and I think there's this sense now that people discover these alternate dimensions and these other possibilities and this infinite cosmos within themselves and the wonders of the world. There's this sense to try to be like, how do I bring this back and monetize it? And how do I, this is the cultural conditioning that comes in. And so I feel like humor is great for this because it's a way of kind of communicating that I don't have all the answers. Like I might have my own biases and I have predilections informed by life experiences that cause me to act a certain way. And it's really healthy, I think, to question that and to be skeptical about that. So even, that's where I do a lot of the satire, and I realize like the heavier stuff, like you could call it conspiracy stuff, about like the globalists and the pharmaceutical companies, man, like it just lends itself to this sense of humor to be like, what, you think that you, one person, have figured it all out, and now it's your job to spread that to the masses. Like, that's the evangelizing aspect around psychedelics that I think actually turns a lot of people off. And they say, like, you don't
Yeah.
want to be like that. You don't want to turn into a hermit throwing stones at the world and, claim that you're enlightened and so on and so forth. And I find a lot of comfort and value in that, and being like, man, to me, humor, satire, making someone laugh, making a good skit, that is its own end. That is a means to an end right there. And so much of what I see in the modern spiritual wellness and healing systems, where they're colliding with capitalism, is like people selling you this potential end state. Like, you're going to microdose and you're going to get to this point. And then you realize, like, okay, I got to that point. What now? I got to that peak. What now? Got to go deliver pizzas. Got to wash the dishes. So if you can kind of harness that sense of humor and joy now, that's going to pay dividends indefinitely. And I've been in some really interesting rooms, some really interesting events through Mycoprenuer and through the opportunities and the interviews and the journalism, et cetera. And I've been asked by people about fundraising, about 5-year plans. And you see it from a mile away. Like, these people are conditioned from their corporate lives, and they're now having these experiences or aware that they're trending, and they want to get in on it. And you see this all the time, where somebody has one microdosing experience, they have one trip, etc. Maybe it's even a year, and then they're launching a psychedelic branding agency, and they've got a Squarespace website, and they've got this highly produced video, and they've cultivated this aura, and they've cultivated this appearance of thought leadership. And in my estimation, it's a lot of times quite vapid underneath. They're just like reciting these tropes, right? About, like, I've heard this ski trope so many times. You go on TikTok and you see a 19-year-old talking about, in Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, he discusses how the brain is like ski slopes and your habits and patterns are deeply ingrained. And then when you do psychedelics, it's like a snowstorm covering the tracks and you can make new tracks. Like, they're just being recited. They're half-baked tropes. Even if there's some truth there, it doesn't necessarily translate to this widespread scaled model. And now you have all these companies and movers and shakers talking about, how are we going to scale this therapy? It's like, it's already at scale. Like, it's already, you grow mushrooms, you connect with the community, you kind of have a lot of what you need there, and it ties into mutual aid really well. And I think that's why the corporatization of psychedelics have had such a rough patch. Is like, look at what happened in Oregon, what could potentially be happening in other states. Like, there's people trying to create a market, and maybe they will succeed, and maybe I'll be part of that, dude. Like, if I get invited to be a part of that, who here is not to say you wouldn't explore opportunities to be at the forefront of something like that? And, like, I try to keep it real and have a sense of humor about it and be like, you probably don't actually need all this. You probably don't need a 6-month subscription of iboga gummies to attain happiness. Like, if you want to do that, fine. Maybe it's going to work for some of you. But, like, at the end of the day, having this sense of humor and joy, connecting with the moment now, that's such a powerful experience. And that's what I want to be known for. So it is very funny to, like, have these, even now in the political referendums, and you have these, like, this huge battle going on that's come to the media right now in Massachusetts with ballot question 4, which Massachusetts could prospectively be the 3rd state to create a legal regulated access program for psychedelics. And there's all of these PACs and super PACs and activists and lobbyist groups and grassroots orgs who are going head to head. And there's an element of astroturfing, subversion, confusion, fear, uncertainty, and distress. And then that ends up getting amplified to the public. So it's like, we've taken this very broken system, which is our bipartisan, consumer-based, capitalist-based political system right now, and we're trying to somehow bring psychedelics and mushrooms into this system. And what I see is more arguing, more unhappiness, and it's like, to me, even if one side or the other wins one of these ballot propositions, the whole culture lost, the community lost. That's kind of how I feel about politics in general right now. It's like, I'm kind of apolitical in a sense, but you can't help but be tied to it. But, like, this forthcoming election, honestly, no matter who wins, it feels like the country loses. Like, look how divided the country is. And maybe there's an element of design there. So again, I think that psychedelics, mushrooms, etc., are really powerful, beautiful tools, but you also have to be committed to what they might open your mind to. And I can't be the only one who's thought sometimes, like, what if I never did these things and just went on with business as usual? I could just sit in front of the fire and go to work and never ask the big questions. Well, too late for that, and I
Yeah.
feel totally fine with the sense that this is my life's path because I'm happy with who I am becoming, who I have become, what I have accomplished. Not that those externalities reflect my sense of self-worth, but I'm happy about it. It's like, okay, I put my axe to the grindstone. I kind of navigated these turbulent waters, and I'm here now, and I have an opportunity to be part of this incredible cosmic joke that we're all living through right now. But I just
Yeah.
can't help but like look at the timeline, just to bring it back to the media. Like, look at what's going on. Like the I search psychedelic news articles every day. I search mushroom news articles, and there's this increasing amount of articles. And I know many of the key stakeholders and have been associated with them or collaborated with them. But there's this whole penchant for promoting tripless psychedelics, non-hallucinogenic psychedelics, like mapping out specific mind states. And okay, there's some interesting stuff there for sure. And I'm nobody to tell people not to go investigate those, but it's like the public sentiment is being massaged and finessed, and it's not happening by force. It's happening by intellectual force. It's happening by the types of articles that get written, the types of journalism that happens, the types of stories that get covered on the news. So to me, I just want to hijack the media and just tell it my way. Like, shouldn't there be room for a polarity of narratives, multipolar world order? Or do we have to all acquiesce to this one publication? Like, okay, the Washington Post says this, the Atlantic says this, that's got to be how it is. But again, those business models prosper off of fear, uncertainty, division. At what point does anyone realistically think that appointing a certain candidate to lord over or be in charge of this system is actually going to introduce meaningful change? Like, I think these systems thrive on the fact that there are so many people who are dependent on them. So when you have something like psychedelics that create pathways to opportunity for people to think outside the box, right? Like, I think that's potentially very dangerous. And that's why, as many cultural commentators have noticed, that they're illegal. It's not because they're dangerous necessarily. They're dangerous to a very established world order. And I hope I hit at least some of the key points there.
Absolutely. Yeah, man, that thing you were saying there about like postulating and wondering like who, because you don't have a crystal ball, you don't have a control group of a reality that where you didn't interact with these things and you could pull from and say, well, that's what would have happened. But like I myself have wondered that at times as well too, because these things have been so sort of like fundamental to the like forging of my psyche in a way. You know what I mean? And yeah, like you're like, what if I didn't at any point uh, have to really face those big picture sort of questions and things and stayed in my reality tunnel? This reminds me a lot of like this thing I've been saying to people lately, but I heard on a podcast some guy said that love equals responsibility, right? And it seems like every conversation I have, this topic becomes relevant, especially within psychedelics. But yeah, if you think about that thing that you were describing, like the sort of the path of that the big picture is taking you on, and the weight of that, right? Everything that you love, if you really break it down, everything that you love, there's a sort of responsibility that you hold to that. Like if you love your kids, you show up as a good father. You love your house plants. If you love your mushrooms, you show them love, then you take care of them as a responsibility to them. If you do this with everything that you love, like love truly does kind of equal responsibility. And there's one of the things that's commonly reported with psychedelics is this heightened sense of love, whether that be this sense of love for yourself, this sense of love for the world, sense of love for people around you. And I think that that's true. I've experienced it. Probably billions of other people have experienced it. But I think that the trade-off with that, I think a big trade-off with that is that there is this responsibility that comes with that amplified sense of responsibility that comes with an amplified sense of love, right? Because all of these things that you're talking about, man, these actual big picture, deep rooted problems like that comes from like a sense of responsibility of like you exist in this world, right? And you want it to see it do better and things like that. And yeah, I think it's really important for people to kind of like, I guess I shouldn't tell anybody what to do, but this thing you said about thought leadership, I really appreciated that as well too, because everyone's a thought leader now. They have a psilocybin experience, and all of a sudden they're a thought leader within the psychedelic space, and I find it massively ironic because, kind of like you said, uh, most of the things that they're saying are just like just echoes. It's just a big echo chamber. It's all like it's so saturated in that, and it's ironic because you would think that this demographic of people who interact regularly with psychedelic drugs, they would be the ones who, of all people, would really take some pride in thinking originally and thinking for themselves. And I say all of this just to say that that is the reason why I really like and kind of fell in love with your content, because it was actually like some unique, valuable points that were articulated in a artistic way. And I think that this space, the psychedelic renaissance, the movement, I think we need more of that shit, man.
Dude, I totally agree. And it was really a happy accident. I always say I discovered it accidentally on purpose. And I think that's a lot of what mushrooms specifically, but psychedelics more broadly do, is you kind of discover them accidentally on purpose. There's a time in your life when you gravitate towards something, you start thinking about it, you're attracted to a friend or a person or whatever that's doing these things. You're like, oh, I like their style. And I always liked kind of the aloof, artistic archetypes, right? Of these people who kind of had one foot in each world. And I very much feel like that. And I think that's what it comes down to, is you have these incredible experiences with psychedelics and you recognize like this world that I've created and fabricated and been thrust into for my whole life. It's not the only way of looking at things. And I think you can get that experience by travel too. Like I went to Baghdad a few years ago and I shot a bunch of really far out content there. Like that's a psychedelic experience to be like, whoa, people are living totally differently. They're prioritizing totally different values and customs, but you see this shared root of humanity at the same time. And I think that's what a good trip can do, is it kind of takes you out of your regular operating world and your culturally conditioned reality, and it puts you into something else, something, to draw from the words of the great bard Terence McKenna, who we've mentioned, something much older, right? Something, whoa, this is really interesting. And to me, that's what sucked my attention up immediately when I had a trip years and years ago was, wow, this doesn't feel like I'm poisoning myself. It feels like the opposite, right? It feels like I'm empowering and I have this incredible imagination and this beautiful body. And like, I just kind of fell in love with that, to tell yourself like, man, I love this human experience. I love this world. Okay, now I'm starting to see some real challenges and hangups. You start to come back from the trip. That's where these integration coaches come on, right? It's like I had this peak experience and I saw all the love in the universe and I figured out what my purpose in life is. And then it requires discipline to put some of those attributes and insights into practice. And I think there a lot of people lack discipline, oftentimes myself included, right? And so then the other end of the pendulum is where I think the microdosing comes in, is people like, you need to be super disciplined. Like you need to get in the ice bath every morning. You need to live stream that. You need to post 8 times a day. And then you need to show up here and there and you got to get on the bandwagon and you can start attracting all these abundance and opportunity. It's like, to me, that's a little bit overselling it. Like, and it really comes down to time. I think we come back to time and this sense of like, what is time? And those are like the big stoner psychonaut questions we wrestle with. But we live in this very strange linear system, like this factory industrial model where it's like, you need to show up at 9, you start the workday, the markets close at 5, you need to do this, 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 and this. And then I don't know that that's ultimately self-serving. Like that leads to burnout, that leads to exhaustion. Well, now I'm sick. Well, thank God I have health insurance through my employer and I can go get my ketamine treatment or my psilocybin analog treatment. And it kind of creates this feedback loop of the rewards you get. Like I got a bonus, I got a raise. I don't know, man. I deconstructed that as many people did at a pretty young age. I started looking for ways I could create value myself, not, tied to a lot of the current culturally accepted incentive systems and so on and so forth. And it's taken me on a wild ride and I'm still getting to do it. So as far as like, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but that's how I feel, Gabriel. I feel like that it's really important that we recognize time doesn't have to be fit into this linear box and this industrial scale of like my self-worth and value is tied to my ability to create margin for the employer to show up and punch the clock. I've literally worked in a factory. Like I worked in a factory in New Zealand boxing green shell mussels for 3 months. And it comes down to an education and a class issue. Like if people want to work in a factory, that's great. but there's pretty clearly to me an exploitative model in place there where like the people who own the factory were going to polo matches around the world and flying, and they had the means of production. And it's literally the factory model. And then most of the employees, I was on a working holiday visa, so it's a little bit different. I could literally quit any day, no problem. I did it for the experience. I made some money. It was awesome. Traveled the world after it. But there were a lot of people who could not do that. Like they were tied to that job because they had a mortgage, and they needed to show up at 5 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. There were people who were ex-felons, right? Who were like, I need this job. I live in a trailer. And like that system kind of takes advantage of that. It's like, you don't have much power or opportunity. Well, you can come work at the factory. Oh, you can come do this. You can come do that. And I don't know about that, man. I think that we're going through a major shakeup right now. When I think of time, just to tie this back into that original question of time, is like, you need time to let these experiences sit too. Like the idea that you can smoke DMT and then a week later think you have it figured out enough that you could be selling this pyramid scheme and getting people like, I think you're going to, it's a model not built on sustainability. And it's one why this whole psychedelic industry that's coming out, the businesses, the people are collapsing left and right, because you can't just have a psychedelic experience in 2018 and then try to show up on the scene and convince people that you know what you're talking about. Like that's a smokescreen. People who have been here, who have done that, are going to be able to see it from a mile away. And to close that thought, I think it's fucking vindicating and amazing and exonerating that so many of us psychonauts are falling into our niches now, because for years we were belittled, criticized, stigmatized, couldn't talk about it openly, couldn't share this. So it's very like underground word of mouth. So now that everything's so public, like a lot of these actors, a lot of these journalists, et cetera, it's like, dude, I'm from San Diego. You're from San Diego. Nobody I know knows you. And we, it's a very connected community in a lot of ways. The people, literally, I've run into people who like live in other states. And they're like, oh yeah, in 2006. Yeah. Oh, in this area, that person. Yeah. I was growing mushrooms for that person. Like it's a pretty small connected community. So I think like if you're coming in and trying to build something else on top of it, that is the proverbial house built on sand. Like a lot of us, I'd like to say, built our home on rocks years ago and just said like, okay, I've experienced true beauty, true grace. You could even say divinity. I'm going to stay close to this. I'm going to make this decision to try to build a relationship and cultivate this. And so it's very strange to me when people who clearly have heard of mushrooms, clearly have heard of LSD, clearly have heard of psychedelics, like literally everyone, at least in the United States, has heard of these things. You can't say, I haven't heard of them. But at some point, a lot of people made the decision to trust the propaganda and the messaging from the establishment, right? I did not. Like, I was very skeptical and inquisitive, and I could go into rabbit holes for hours talking about this. But like when I first got really interested in macrodose mushrooms, and that led me to all these other substances and DMT and salvia and LSD and MDMA and so on and so forth, I got to enroll as a freshman at USF, University of San Francisco. I was a stone's throw away from the hate, right? So there's like Hate Street, the Panhandle, Golden Gate Park, this iconic legacy of psychonauts in the West, of something new, something different, the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Timothy Leary, et cetera. And I realized pretty early on, there were a bunch of very, quote, successful people who were psychonauts, right? So it's like, up until then, I had this messaging that like, if you take psychedelics, if you do drugs, you will be a burnout. You will not be able to function in society. And then all of a sudden, I'm meeting people who literally have private islands, houseboats, they've started tech companies, and like, some of them, they're not the people that you see jumping around and trying to promote their tech venture on Instagram. Like, they figured this shit out. They were there in the early days. They built something huge. It just completely shifted my worldview away from, and not to say that you have to, again, measure the value of your psychedelic experiences by these external achievements or whatever. But like, I started connecting with the artistic class and being like, whoa, a lot of the great musicians, like a lot of very interesting artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, they had this common thread that they were interested in psychedelics, and that happens in a very real way. Silicon Valley, it was built by Aspies on acid is one way I've heard it. People with Asperger's who took LSD. That's like early Silicon Valley. You look at the Steve Jobs of the world. You look at Jim Fadiman was there front and central. You look at Whole Earth Electronic Link and Stuart Brand and Sergey Brin and Larry Page, like these absolutely paradigm shifting companies that are way ahead of DC or of traditional power, the disruptors, like there was an element of interest in psychedelic experiences and applying that to your life. So that became my guiding compass in a lot of ways. Like, okay, with this great experience and what I perceive to be specialized knowledge, that it's very arcane, it's very enigmatic. Not a lot of people are openly discussing this. Okay, I've had these experiences. How can I create value in the world and contribute to the world? I felt a sense of responsibility. I still feel that. So if people are getting into psychedelics and the psychedelic renaissance because you're driven by moving units and trying to ascertain a certain social status and fit in, to me that's the opposite of what you should try to be doing. Like, move a little bit away from the status quo, be aware of it, but kind of build your own bubble. And when you build your own bubble, when the bubble at large bursts, you're still sitting pretty. And just to tie it all back into mushrooms, like that's where the real value is. Like, you can grow mushrooms for food, you can connect with mushroom community and educate and learn from each other, you can grow them for medicine, you can start experimenting with them for materials. And like, just given the current systems we're operating in and the absolute shit show that's taken over the political circus, and the cost of living rising and the fear and the weaponization of media and of this, that, and the other, like, I think it's time to start really, really considering alternative approaches. And I find that mushrooms offer an alternative approach in my own experience. Thanks for the rant opportunity there.
Yeah, man. No, it's there's a lot that we said brought up for me. So this is the first time that we've really gotten to speak extensively. So I'm just in this loops into what you're talking about, but I'm just going to give you the quick rundown on like my sort of psychedelic path thing. I found them at 18, became extremely interested, started taking them quite often. Shortly after that, I started selling them and also facilitating DMT experiences in my apartment. I was arrested at 20, had to do some jail time for it. And that thing that you were describing of like that system, right, that you experienced in New Zealand at this factory, I had like already been experiencing that a lot just from like the sort of like treadmill that is like, all right, you high school and then like college and like, get a job while you're in college and network while you're in college. But whenever I got arrested, man, it was this very much like, oh, like the system just got like much more like real and pronounced. And it was really eye opening to me. I feel very fortunate that like I was able to bounce back from that situation, but by being within it, I saw so viscerally how other human beings get trapped in it, right? You talk about the Telegram trappers, like it's a trap. It truly is a trap that they're in. And yeah, and so it was, for me, it was like, and when I got out, still this massive interest in like to my core, it was the most fascinating thing in the world to me, psychedelic drugs. And I knew I wanted to be a part of it in some sort of way. And I also knew I didn't fit into the sort of current normal paradigm. And so the beginning of my journey very much was this sort of, I would say, like desperate attempt at like making YouTube videos in my parents' basement, trying to like, I started taking psychedelics a few years ago. Like, here's what here's my story. Here's what you need to know. And it was this funny journey for me of like recognizing that what I really wanted to do and what I really needed to do uh, was like to provide value, right? Because it's this rationally, it's this very easy to see sort of recidivism that you get. Like I actually provide value to people, and then it seems like generally, if you do that well enough, like it's sort of provided back to me. Um, yeah, and I see that within you too, of recognizing the trap that a lot of this is and actually just trying to provide like value in some sort of way to people. And I really appreciate that, man.
Dude, thank you so much. I am very grateful for all of these opportunities. And a lot of times I would question, like, what is my purpose anymore here? And I think, like, for me, when I had my early mushroom trips, like, they gave me a very clear sense of purpose. And then that sense of purpose oftentimes butts heads with the world, right? As we talked about, like the world not being set up to reify and to validate a lot of your insights. And I can't be the only one who had these grandiose designs because I had this vision and this is how I'm going to do it. And then you put everything into it. And then it's like, whoa, I have to actually deal with other people and with their schemes. And then I have to figure out, for me, the bubble burst in a sense, in a true way, like when college ended. And I'm very proud of the fact that I finished college because there were so many temptations not to. I had, people dropping out left and right, and life gets in the way. And especially when you're on the psychonaut path. And it was very easy to have potentially done that. But something in me said, all right, you started this, finish it, and I just wanted to jump through the hoops a little bit. And I actually gained a tremendous amount from those experiences. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, I jumped through the hoops, I completed college. I was teaching at one of the world's most renowned high schools. There's 1,000-to-1 ratio of applications to people who get appointed, the most highly qualified educators in the world. It's a Bill Gates founded and funded school. And I got to travel to Hong Kong to consult, and they sent me to Atlanta to the Savannah College of Art and Design campus there. And I'm working with all these major educators, and I have a lot of stories about that. And then just like we discussed, like the rug just gets pulled out from under you. They're like, hey, we're going to change some things around, change our model. We're opening a new campus. You're teaching multimedia. They slashed 30% of their staff overnight. I literally had glowing recommendations from the director and from people at the corporate level. And I was doing consulting and I was speaking at conferences and published and so on and so forth. And that wasn't enough, right? And then I get into this other position and I'm renting my apartment and okay, I made it. I'm doing it. And it's like so much of my life was always up to someone else, right? I had tied myself to this sinking ship in a way. And I realized that, like, I saw other colleagues who were 20 years older and like they got let go. And it's like, shit, man, I got 2 kids, I got a mortgage, and they're scrambling and hitting the pavement. And something in me just said, like, I'd already had a lot of psychedelic experiences and been like, I tried to do it the straight and narrow way, right? And like, I still try to toe that line as often as possible. And a lot of times that means like, unfortunate realities sometimes, like trying to compromise or being like, all right, I got to take this gig for that. And like, I think now that psychedelics are in vogue, like there's a lot of people who see that. And like there is a quick route to a payday a lot of times. Like you set up shop in an area where people don't really know necessarily what's going on. You appoint yourself as the self-appointed thought leader and you build the website and the funnels and you use all these traditional tactics. And then now you're the guy. And I didn't really want to go that route because I had this sense of I don't currently feel like I need to try to monetize other people's unsureness. I need to hustle and take gigs where I can get them and, learn. It's all a kind of learning experience and trajectory and then patchwork a few different things together. And I always have firmly believed, like, if you just put yourself out there and as you say, you create value for people and you do it as often as possible, wherever you can, like that value is going to get returned. And I think that does tie into the sort of woo-woo sense of psychedelics. And like, there's so many funny synchronicities that can only be explained by ceding to the mystery, by being like, I filmed a little funny video the other day about doomsday preppers and Costco because there's this viral video, people have probably seen it, of the Costco guys. And like, they've turned into these major influencers and like, they're really upholding and uplifting all these kind of values that a lot of us are questioning about, we're the Costco guys, double chunk chocolate cookie. Like this is absolutely taken over people's timelines. And now they've got these major brand endorsement deals. So I did kind of a funny spin on that of like, we're preppers talking about doomsday and this looming sense of catastrophe and apocalypse that so many people refer to, that like supposedly we're on the edge of this planetary crisis where like civilization's no longer going to be sustainable. And this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And, we got to listen to all of the people at the World Economic Forum and so on and so forth. Like the World Bank has a solution for this. Just, they got to flood the market in sub-Saharan Africa with different pharmaceuticals and then block aid. And, there's all kinds of funny stuff there. And I'm not trying to like figure it out. I'm just trying to hold a mirror up to it and be a little bit absurd. So I did that Costco video. People who have been interested in these things like them and they get them. And while I'm doing it, a literal doomsday prepper that I know walks by. Haven't seen this guy in like 3 years. I'm like, what are the odds of that? Like, I come to Costco to make a parody about doomsday prepping. And then this guy I know who literally has a compound with 26,000 pounds of food and, aqua purification systems. And he's growing fish or whatever so he can eat them. And he's got like 3 acres and like as doomsday as you can on a biblical level. To me, that's very funny. And one thing I've taken to doing, which I'll offer unsolicited advice to people who want to get into psychedelics, like on an industry level. It's a very strange idea. Just start writing. Honestly, that's by far the way where you can prove that you know what you're talking about. Like if you write, you create content, you're original, that will find its audience. And people who have been having similar thoughts, they will find that. So when you see these tropes of like, oh, that's just a regurgitated, rehashed trope this person's talking about. They're talking about a microdosing protocol that they learned from this person. Like, okay, maybe there's some value in that. A lot of people can do it. If you want to establish yourself, showcase original thinking, showcase that you've actually taken the time to think about these subjects, drawn from different inspirations, insights, influences, synthesize them into your own unique model that's going to create value for people because it helps them think about the world. And that's really what I would say, like, got me to the point where I've got invited all over the world. And I've got, I'm super proud of those things. Like there's definitely a little bit of ego involved because I've worked very hard for a long time and been stigmatized and dismissed. And I chose not to go into academia. I chose not to go to law school. I chose to stay as close to mushrooms and as close to learning about mushrooms as I could. And, like a lot of us weirdos, there were very few opportunities for that. And you kind of all connect with each other. And now that it's a thing, a lot of us are very well positioned to question rationally and to offer our own insights and rebuttals against the powers that be trying to co-opt mushrooms. And yeah, so, I got a lot of thoughts about it. I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, I think that if you create value, you put stuff out there, things will come back. And all the time when I write an article, even if it just starts out as gobbledygook, like barf on the page, just like, hey, I had this cool insight, write it down, like start thinking about it, start working actively, and then start figuring out how to finesse that into something you can actually put out there. It could look very different for different people, but every time I put an article out, someone reads it, an opportunity comes. And like I started my Substack 3 years ago and I moved over to Beehive, which is a different platform, but I had like 65 subscribers. You know what I mean? I think a lot of content creators get this. Like people are out there putting stuff out on YouTube. You have, you kind of measure, unfortunately, your success based on metrics. And I do it all the time too, where you're like, I got to get more engagement. I got to get more. Well, like I had 65 subscribers. I wrote a piece that somebody read and they were an editor of something. They invited me to publish. Then that set off a domino reaction where then someone else reached out like, oh, I read this piece you did for this website, which was still a niche independent website. Why don't we do this together? And then all of a sudden your network starts growing. You do that. It's almost unpredictable. But what you can predict is if you create value and you take that leap of faith and put something out, there will be something that comes back to you. Maybe it's not going to be immediate. Maybe it's not going to be exactly what you expected. But like I find tremendous confidence and faith in that and being like, I don't have to know. Like if I write a piece, I might not get paid the $150 or the $300 that this publication might pay me. Maybe I don't get paid anything, but I've got people's attention and we live in an attention economy. And if you can do those things, like, again, I'm all for trying to co-opt or disrupt the system and take over, but like we still have fundamental physical realities that we live in where we have to figure out pretty much how to, put some money in the bank and food on the table and things like that. And maybe there's creative ways to do it where you don't need money. I'm open-minded to that, but I'm still, that's my thought on that.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that seems like a hard thing for a lot of people, especially psychonauts, to find balance in, right? Like there's this, we go to the mountaintop and we have these insights in these moments, and so many of us, I think most of us, truly have this sort of desire to like ground that into reality. But it's this dichotomy because it's like we've described, we kind of exist in a bit of an insane world, right? And so, but if we want to, it's like if we want to ground these things into reality, to integrate them and things like that, it does require a certain degree of participation. It seems like within the world, right? If we want, and but at the same time, it's like we get so much, you get so much value, people find so much value out of exiting that game, right? But I think that the if you truly desire to ground some of these things, it does require a certain degree of participation within the game that you've kind of escaped from. And so like finding balance in this seems to be tricky for a lot of people. It's like, all right, I'll go, you know meditate for 40 minutes under the Bodhi tree, and then I'll come back and answer emails. And that's,
Yeah.
I'm a Renaissance man in that way, but yeah, like the thing you were saying too about like just recommending that people who want to be involved in the industry just start writing is really funny because I just had this feeling too that if I just started to connect with people, that it would lead to places. And so the sort of modality, the medium that I used for that was podcasting, because it necessitated that I reach out to these people, establish a relationship with them. We get to interact with one another's consciousnesses for like an hour, hour and a half long format. And usually through those experiences, like you usually end up forming a kind of unique bond with that person, even if it is just somebody you're talking to over the internet. Like I feel like a unique bond to you now, for example. And it's funny because yeah, it was truly in this kind of attempt to provide value. I would say, it was like, all right, podcast, you want to come on my podcast? And then there was a certain individual who I had on my podcast who was like, hey man, um, do you think that you could help me do you think you start help me like selling these Amanita mushrooms? Like I have this business, it opened up this door for me that truly would have never been there if I hadn't just like stuck my head above the water, been like, hey, I'm here, just want to talk, but
I think that's the number one thing a lot of people are missing when they think about podcasts or newsletters. It's like they're preoccupied with the numbers, the metrics, the artificialness of it. To me, like a lot of that stuff is largely beyond your control, but you can reach out and build connections with people and cultivate those. So to me, like podcasting, that kicked off everything. And it was a pandemic project. And I was like, hey, I'm going to write 10 people. And this was 2020, like people I know who are into mushrooms, some of whom already have a public platform because they're a therapist, or a friend wrote a book about mushrooms and was like very early to the public game talking about psilocybin mushrooms. And like 4 people, 5 people out of 10 were like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And then it just opened the door. And it's like all of a sudden, within 5 episodes, someone in Colorado reaches out. They're like, hey, I heard this, podcast. There's not that many. I'm a mushroom entrepreneur. I want to come on and talk. You're like, tight. All of a sudden, my network just got bigger. I stayed with that dude in Denver during psychedelic science, right? And like, he's got a whole basement where he's teaching classes and like very much above board with everything. And like, again, like, it was unpredictable the route it would take, but I just resolved at a certain point to be like, all right, this is what I'm doing now. I really think I've only got about 10 more minutes. So just as a heads up,
yeah,
I
brother.
wish we could talk another hour and a half, dude. And we'll have to do a part 2 or get you on
Yeah.
Mycoprenuer. Cause I just want to say, I'm so impressed with your interviewing abilities. I've done a lot of podcasts. I've hosted a lot. You're super dialed in. I just woke up. I'm probably all over the place, but like, I also like to just let it rip and free flow and see where it
Oh,
goes. And I'm
dude,
really
this has been
impressed with it.
fantastic. I really appreciate that. Like, truly, really appreciate that. And like, you've been like such a pleasure. And all of your tangents have been gold, by the way. None of them were crazy rants. They were truly, truly good stuff, dude. But yeah, man, we could wrap this up here since you got to hop off and stuff. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to people before we head out of here?
I just want to say, believe in yourself, like just believe in yourself, bet on yourself, because otherwise you're going to be betting on someone else's vision of reality. And as we've seen, like visions of reality can collapse and coalesce and turn inside out. So like cultivate your own sense of reality. I think mushrooms are great for that. I'm super interested in Amanita. I've had a handful of experiences specifically with sleep, like had some wild dreams, right? Probably a lot of people can attest to, like by taking a tincture of Amanita. I found them in the wild. I think that's a really sleeper banger, you could call it. It's kind of always been there. It's got its own emoji. It's got the whole Alice in Wonderland, the mythology behind it. And it kind of typifies and exemplifies this strange connection we have to mushrooms, right? Where it's like, psilocybin mushrooms, totally illegal. But the Amanita, that one's cool. You can buy that one in gummies at the gas station or whatever. Like, so somewhere in the middle, I think there's a lot of truth, a lot of value, and I want to learn more about it. So I got a lot that I would like to say, but please reach out to me if you're interested in connecting. I'm super easy to find. My platform's called Mycoprenuer, Mycoprenuer. A lot of people, including at big events, call it Micropreneur, which is absolutely not the name. It's Mycopreneur, but super easy to find. Love to engage with people, love to learn. And I'm not a know-it-all. I'm not an expert. So I want to learn from people. I've got time, and hit me up. So yeah, reach out. I've got the newsletter that goes out every week. That's the other thing I'll pump right now, because Meta, Instagram, TikTok, they're ruthless for mushroom accounts, right? And like that's how a lot of mycology advocates and enthusiasts and activists connected was during the pandemic. We all had a bunch of time on our hands. All of a sudden, it became culturally acceptable to start talking about mushrooms. And just to loop it back to the pandemic, got a lot of thoughts on it, but what I'll lead with is just saying it fundamentally disrupted my sense of confidence in the powers that be and in how the future would turn out. And I think there's really a mirror there for why mushrooms started becoming so popular, because it's like, all right, you're locked in a house. It's this horrible, deadly disease. There's all these crazy inconsistencies with enforcement and regulation and bureaucracy and so on and so forth. And like a lot of people were like, all right, so I'm not going to play this game anymore. I'm going to start talking about what I want to talk about. And for years, I had to harbor the sense of like being a closeted psychonaut. Like I can't speak about mushrooms because I need a job, and I need this and that. And when the pandemic hit a number of months, maybe even a year into it, I was like, fuck that. Like, I'm going to just speak my truth right now, share with what I have. And lo and behold, now mushrooms, psilocybin, amanita, etc., are at the absolute vanguard and forefront of multiple intersections of society, from commerce to mental health to policy. Like all this, it's fascinating. And I'm here for it. But at the end of the day, my last message is like, don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take the insights and the thoughts and the downloads too seriously. Like apply yourself to them. But I would say have high hopes, but low expectations. Like don't have expectations that just because you have this vision that you're the DMT king and you need to facilitate 5 MEO ceremonies on a yacht, like you don't necessarily have to do that. Like entertain it, check it out, see if it actually makes sense. But like, don't be heartbroken when you start, running into red tape and challenges. Like just have fun. And then satire, Instagram, so on, TikTok, perfect for being absurdist, Hunter S. Thompson, cryptic, over the top. Have fun with it. You'll find your audience and believe in yourself.
Amazing. I think at the core of it all, the core of all this shit we just said, man, is people need to dial in their microdose. I mean, you start exactly. Microdosing.
You gotta get the perfect microdose. You got to get a coach. Yeah. You got to do a $9,000 training program. Hey, I'm here for it, man. Like I've definitely had the temptation to be like, should I launch like a microdosing brand? And Psychedelic Water had it right. I don't know if you guys have seen that. There's literally a brand called Psychedelic Water, and they raised like $10 million selling a TikTok product, mostly on TikTok, for water that has like some nootropics in it. It's got nothing psychedelic in it. But again, like at a certain point, it's like, just be a parody of yourself. Like I'm probably going to launch a mushroom Speedo line at some point, right? Like I was just talking to people, I'm going to have someone make me a mushroom grill. I got reishi mushrooms. Like, can you make me like a mushroom grill? Like just have fun, lean into the absurdity. And I think if you make yourself a little bit kooky, a little bit eccentric, a little bit insane, then when the world starts to get kooky, eccentric, and insane, you're way ahead of the curve there. You're like, oh, this is new. This is old hat for me. This is nothing new. I've already been out there. So now that, the fundamental models of reality we're all carrying around in our heads, now that I've already disintegrated that and blasted it into the noosphere, to the ether, like what can really harm me at this point? Like I look at what's happening in the world and I go, I don't think that's what's really happening. Like that's one version I could think about it, but just have fun. Make some satire, try it out. That's the other thing I'll say is like a lot of people don't even know they're good at it until they try it. Like I had no idea I could be a satirist. I didn't even know really what a satirist was. And then I just decided to be goofy and have fun and do something, and it caught on and it hit. And then that's, I think, the last bit I'll close with is like, if what you're doing is not fulfilling you, maybe it was good for a point, like how can you leverage that into something else that will fulfill you? Keep being creative, keep pushing the envelope, keep trying new things. And, if you start 8 projects and you diligently apply yourself, one of those projects is going to succeed. Like I thought I was going to be a touring musician, and I have a lot of stories about that. And like, I went through the ringer and like tried engaging with record labels and toured and so on and so forth. And like, here I am doing a lot of those same things in a totally different capacity. I'd never once in my mind thought that I could do comedy or satire, and it just happened. So like, try new things, surprise yourself, have fun, and believe in yourself. And I'm super pumped that we're getting to have this conversation. So please hit me up, Mycoprenuer. I'm glad we got to connect, Gabriel. Like I'll certainly pay much closer attention to your work now. Just like you said, like there's a million people floating around. You're like, oh, check this out. I've seen this, that. you form a personal connection, it takes the content and the value to a whole new level. So if for nothing else, I'm glad we did this podcast just so I can pay closer attention to your work.
Oh, thanks, brother. I feel the same way. I always look forward to your reels coming through on my phone, man. It's like one of the few things that always hits because it knows that I like it. It's like one of those few pieces of content that's consistently there. But yeah, and I have seen the psychedelic water. I think it was like kava and like L-theanine or some shit in there. There's a lot of really, really super interesting shit going on at the consumer product level for psychedelic compounds and things. But we'll probably have to unpack that in another podcast. But yeah, dude.
Yeah, and
Cool.
then also I think you'd be great on stage. Like you're really good at interviewing, right? So like check those out. And like constantly people are inviting me to stuff because there's not that many people that do it well apparently or are bankable. And I'm out here trying to be like, look at the YouTubers, look at the podcast hosts. Like if you can hold attention in a space and develop, like that can translate really well to emceeing, to being on stage. And I think that's like the next iteration of where we're headed with a lot of these things. Is there's so many cities that could use some kind of mushroom or psychedelic in-person event. Like I just went to one in Oklahoma City. People were coming out from all over the place. I went to one in San Diego where I'm from. People were flying out from the UK, like been to Miami twice, Denver. I'm going back to Denver, New York City, so on and so forth. They start seeing like, whoa, Chicago doesn't have an event. Like maybe they have a few. They don't really have a big one. Nashville doesn't have one. So like, check that out. I think that's where the next wave is coming because a lot of people are over this whole like digital connection. Like it works to a degree, but there's no, dude, just the last bit. Like in Oklahoma, I was at this incredible house after party. It had like 90, I don't want to give a percent. It had, you could say like a who's who of different people in the cultivator, mushroom space, product space. And I'm like, wow, there's really not that many people. Like a lot of these people, they're coming from coast to coast and they're all at this one house. Like, that's pretty remarkable. That's special. Find where those things are happening. If you don't know where they are, create your own. Go to the Mycological Society, put out I started the podcast based on a event I did once a week randomly in the town I live in. I was like, hey, I'm making YouTube videos. I wasn't even doing mushroom stuff yet. I was like, I'm a creator. I want to meet other creators. People came out. I talked to someone who had a podcast. They're like, oh, this is exactly how you do it. This is how I did it. It's really easy. You don't need to pay for this or that. Just get this platform, get that. Another person at the same event had written a mushroom book, as I mentioned. I start talking to them. I was like, hey, what if I did like a podcast about mushrooms? Would you ever come on it? Yeah. It's community connection. And whilst online and digitally can be a good place to start, get belly to people, get in the same room with people, go drink some sake and eat some sushi together and, pop some Amanita gummies when it's bedtime and see what happens, bro. So I got a dip, but thank you so much for doing this, Gabriel. Peace
Much
out,
love,
everybody.
dude. Thank you very much. Peace.
See ya.